Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Album of the Week video. This is episode number 217. So after a brief break away from the metal of last week's episode, I'm back to the metal here again with Burn This Town, the cult classic debut album from one of new wave of British heavy metal's unsung heroes, Battleaxe, released in 1983 via the legendary Music for Nations label. Of course, also Roadrunner. Of course, this album is now 40 years old. So, with all that said, let's begin. From what I can gather about Battleaxe pre-1982 is that, well, there really isn't that much story information. All that I can come up with is that Battleaxe were formed in 1979 by both Brian Smith and Dave King. Somewhere in this time frame, both members Mick Percy and Ian Thompson would soon join the fold, which would round out the classic original lineup. By 1982, they would join forces with Terry Gavigan to sign a one-off deal with his label, the very legendary cult Guardian Records and Tapes label, which has produced the Rock Snacks record, Satan's Kiss of Death 45, the Hollow Ground 45 EP, Spartan Warrior's debut album Steel and Chains, which I've already covered on this channel as an Album of the Week episode. Just to name some for you, eventually the band would record their debut album with Terry at his Guardian Studios in Durham, UK, where eventually two songs from these sessions would be used as their debut 45 under Terry's Guardian's label. That would be the Burn This Town single in 1982. This made its way to Music for Nations, who caught what Battleaxe were offering, and MFN reached out to the band and offered them, I guess, a better deal. So, I take it that the band sent the label the tapes of the recorded material and along with concept art, which I'll get to that story soon. And by 1983, Music for Nations would ultimately release their debut album, Burn This Town. So, featuring 10 tracks, clocking in at the length of 36 minutes and 32 seconds, these 10 tracks are, of course, beginning with Ready to Deliver, Her Mama Told Her, the title track, Dirty Rocker, Overdrive, Running Out of Time, Battleaxe, Star Maker, Thor Thunder Angel, and then finally ending with Hands Off. So there you go, folks. There's your 10 tracks. Now, I'm a fan of Battleaxe. I discovered him through just seeing the album cover for this album, and as goofy and primitive as it is, it was enough to pique my interest, and what I was treated to would stick with me for the rest of my life. With all the said great new wave or British heavy metal full-length albums that have been talked about to death, I feel that this album should get more of that kind of love. I mean, it kind of does, but not to the very extent as like a Lightning to the Nations, or let's say a Wildcat from Tigers of Pantang, or Rock Until You Drop from Raven, or let's say Welcome to Hell from Venom, for just examples for you, or even Power Games for some reason, And I feel like that this album, I think, if anything, I think this is actually maybe better than Power Games, and honestly, I think this should get, just as much of the same kind of love, So that's where I'm kind of getting at. This is just one of those albums where it kept that rough as nails, youthful energy that you normally never got with most new wave or British heavy metal bands who transitioned from the 45s to the full-length LPs. It's like something changed musically whenever that usually happens. Now, there are some exceptions for this, but for the most part, if you wanted a prime taste of what the new wave or British heavy metal was all about, you really needed to hear the band's 45s, because that's where the spirit was felt. However, with the case for Battleaxe's debut here, that spirit stayed with them. So in a way, this full length can be used as one of the primest examples of what the new wave of British heavy metal was all about. However, kinda late, cause this was 1983, and this is when the new wave of British heavy metal was about to collapse. So maybe it's better to say that this was one of the last remnants of what the spirit, or the true spirit, of the new wave of British heavy metal had meant. This is such a great record. From the start of this record to the very end, it's jam-packed with that primal raw energy. It sounds like a band who is playing their ass off at a rinky-dink pub that reeks of booze, cigarettes, and sweaty metalheads. The way it's meant to be felt whenever you put on something that was from that classic era of the new wave of British heavy metal. Just listen to the rigid rockers like Ready to Deliver, the title track, Overdrive, Running Out of Time, Battleaxe, Starmaker, and the absolute greatest title here, Thor Thunder Angel. How can you not like that title? Oh, and of course, Hands Off. These are what made the new wave of British heavy metal so infectious from the start. It's that take no prisoners ethic that resonated with me from when I started digging into the new wave of British heavy metal. It's all rough around the edges, but it feels right and makes so much sense for this. Even in the more quasi-hooky rockers like Her Mama Told Her and Dirty Rocker. It's corny, but it's the right kind of corny that normally you expect from the new wave of British heavy metal. And it's what you've come to then admire and respect in the end. You get what I'm saying there? And this is all brought to life by Terry Gavigan's style. If you are not by now familiar with everything that was released on his Guardian Records and Tapes label, then you should know what the sound is like on those releases. And that's what's present here. It's that raw, primitive, demo-ish recording sound that made up the sound of the new wave of British heavy metal. And that sound is what you normally would be treated to on the 45s. And that quality is what is presented here. And it's why this is so great and a perfect representation of a good new wave of British heavy metal full-length album. Now, before I end things here, since I alluded to the album cover art at the beginning, I need to keep that promise. So, once a release deal had been struck with Music for Nations, the master tapes were forwarded to him, and the album title Burn This Town was created. The label requested some concept ideas, for the cover art, so the band asked their friend Arthur Ball, who was a local artist. He was asked if he could come up with suggestions. He then produced the first cover artwork as it is, now known. However, only as a rough proof drawing. Arthur planned to redraw the whole thing again to a much higher standard once it was to be approved by the record label, that being Music for Nations. But when Music for Nations received the proof artwork for approval, they went ahead and just pressed 2,000 units for a worldwide release without the band's consent. The graphic looked amateurish, and the band worried what this might do to their reputation. Well, the album sold well, and the band began developing a reputation in the region as a solid heavy metal outfit. Of course, I now appreciate the original cover, but with this led to numerous alternate covers on different labels. For instance, in 1984, the French label Burnett Records, who I also mentioned in my Album of the Week episode for Tank's classic album, This Means War. They had come up with their own album cover for this album, and as you can now see, if the band felt cheated by MFN for using a cheesy concept cover, then I can't imagine how they felt when they first saw what Burnett Records did. It's kinda even dorkier, but maybe in a sort of lovable way. but it's still objectively bad, worse than the original. And then in 2014, when Battleaxe had signed with Steamhammer for an album deal, which of course led to their comeback full-length album Heavy Metal Sanctuary, they also agreed on to remaster and reissue their first 2 albums. With this came another redo of the album cover for Burn This Town. So instead of a dorky long-haired biker guy wielding a battle axe, it got changed to a badass female biker wielding a battle axe. Yes, it's objectively drawn better, though I kind of prefer Chris Moyen's version. Still, nothing can quite capture the primitive amateurish nature of the original album cover, as I feel it best represents that golden time that was the new wave of British heavy metal, and it fit the best for the music that was captured for this record, which is why it remains special to me and probably for most others. So, there it is, 40 years for this classic new wave of British heavy metal album. If you have any thoughts, whether they are positive or negative, you can leave them all in the comments section below. But, if you haven't, if you still are not familiar by now with the new wave of British heavy metal and want a fine taste of what it sounded like, then you can't go wrong with Battleaxe's 1983 debut full-length LP, Burn This Town. So, with that, this is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.